Good afternoon, everybody. I thank the organizers for having invited me here to give a talk on polycystic ovarian syndrome, and I was asked by Manjushri to put it in such a way that it's a win-win situation for all of us who are treating infertility patients and who are treating polycystic ovarian patients in general. I just came across this slide, and all of us need to know one thing, that polycystic ovarian syndrome is like an iceberg. Now what we end up seeing is just the tip of this iceberg. Can I have a pointer? Yeah. So it is the obesity, insulin resistance, hyperandrogenism and anovulation on which we keep on focusing all the time. But mind well, it needs a holistic approach. And these are major issues which are involved in managing a PCOS patients. So now polycystic ovarian syndrome we know is one of the most common cause of infertility. It is a syndrome and not a disease. There are multiple potential etiologies with variable clinical expression, and the classic syndrome was described by Steen and Leventhal way back in 1935. Menstrual disturbances are commonly observed in PCOS, which include oligomenorrhea, amenorrhea, and prolonged erratic menstrual bleeding. However, 30% of women with PCOS, they have normal periods, and approximately 85 to 90% women with oligomenorrhea have PCOS, while 30 to 40% of women with amenorrhea have PCOS. There are three major hypotheses: familial, ovarian and adrenal steroidogenesis disorder, and hyperinsulinemia. There is a high prevalence of PCOS or its features amongst the first-degree relative, and this suggests a genetic influence, whether this is an X-linked dominant disorder or not. Now this has a polygenic pathology. There are a lot of epigenetic factors at play. This is linked to male pattern baldness and non-insulin dependent diabetes. There has also been an association between pro-inflammatory genotypes and PCOS involving the TNF-alpha and interleukins. And it is a dysfunctional secretion of these genotypes which are related to abnormal ovulation, luteinization, and even hyperandrogenism. As far as the ovarian and adrenal steroidogenesis disorder is concerned, we know there is an increase in the GnRH from hypothalamus, increased LH secretion as compared to FSH. LH stimulates the ovarian theca cells. There is ineffective suppression of the LH pulse frequency, and the androgen excess is increasing the LH by blocking the hypothalamic factor. Hyperinsulinemia also produces a hyperandrogenic state. There is excess insulin production and insulin resistance, and PCOS have always been linked with insulin resistance, which can be prevalent in women independently of obesity. What I want to emphasize here is the lean PCOS patient can also have hyperinsulinemia. And the physiologic hyperinsulinemia of adolescents may be another factor which is responsible for insulin resistance. So there are a lot of controversies in the origin of PCOS. There are lots of theories. I'm not going into details. The intrauterine theory which has now come up says it is the high maternal testosterone levels which reprogram the female reproductive axis to induce PCOS in later life. There are certain KISS peptides which are coded by the KISS1 gene. They are found to be a key factor in regulation of LH and FSH. Then there is an alteration in the biodiversity of the gut myobiota, and there are unending controversies. Why it is important? Because we need to know, because this is a complex syndrome with varied etiology. Signs and symptoms we are all aware of: hirsutism, acne, alopecia, and ovulatory symptoms, and obesity. The menstrual dysfunction we have discussed. What we need to know is the chronic estrogen stimulation of endometrium with no progesterone for differentiation leads to intermittent breakthrough, and there is a risk of endometrial hyperplasia and cancer in this women. Hyperandrogenism leads to hirsutism, acne, male pattern balding. Majority patients have elevated androgen levels. However, free testosterone is the most sensitive parameter. We know the ovarian abnormalities in the form of a sclerotic cortex, multiple follicles in the peripheral location, and 80% of women with PCOS have these classic cysts. The sequel of PCOS are not only there in the reproductive age group, but they are there in the early childhood and adolescent, where you have a premature adrenarche, you have manifestation of adolescent PCOS. In reproductive age group, you have infertility, amenorrhea, menstrual irregularities, and not only that, postmenopausal women are also affected with metabolic syndrome, increased risk of heart disease, endometrial cancer, hyperplasia, and osteoporosis. So for a PCOS, don't expect everyone to understand your journey, especially they have never had to walk your path. Why? Because of associated comorbidities in the form of increased risk of type 2 diabetes, low HDL, high triglycerides, sleep apnea, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, metabolic syndrome, elevated CRP, heart disease, and atherosclerosis. The diagnostic criteria of PCOS also are varied. They have been changing from the NIH to the Rotterdam criteria to the AES Society criteria, and you can see that the NIH criteria includes all of the following, that is hyperandrogenism and menstrual dysfunction. They were revised later by Rotterdam, which includes two of the following: clinical and biochemical hyperandrogenism, oligoanovulation and polycystic ovaries, and the AES Society criteria includes all of these following. When you evaluate a PCO patient, what we need to see, we need to see the basic hormonal parameters which all of us are aware of. Serum testosterone and free androgen index, however, are the most sensitive of the parameters, and all of you know you must do the fasting blood sugar, insulin, FSH and LH values as well. And then the only point which I want to emphasize is AEPOS has revised the criteria for the USG evidence as more than 25 follicles per ovary from their initial criteria of 12 or more follicles. And we need to exclude these hyperprolactinemia, the NCAH, and ovarian and adrenal tumors in these patients as well, because nowadays we come across lot of patients, young population, with polycystic ovarian syndrome. Now when you have the management plan for polycystic ovarian syndrome patients, it is very important for the physician and the patient that be strong and fight PCOS, because we are going to fight in fourfold directions: lifestyle modification, ovulation inductions, first line therapy with IUI, then IVF, in vitro maturation of oocytes. So how do we go about it? Lot of needs to be emphasized for weight loss. Then the non-pharmacological, as I mentioned, you need to be very strict with your patients for your physical activity, lifestyle modification, healthy and balanced diet. And then we come to the pharmacological management, about which I'll detail in the next few slides. But these are the pharmacological agents in management of polycystic ovarian syndrome patients. A word about oral contraceptive use and abuse in young PCOS. We see lot of patients receiving the hormones. Now WHO recommends OCPs with 35 grams of estradiol with cyproterran acetate should only be used when treating moderate to severe hirsutism or acne due to high risk of DVT. Other lower risk OCPs are recommended for irregular menses and mild hirsutism. Metformin, I need not glorify. This is considered for obese as well as non-obese women for better weight, hormonal and metabolic outcome. All of us practicing IVF know that adjunct metformin during an IVF cycle helps improve the clinical pregnancy rate, decrease the risk of OHSS. Still, there are controversies lingering around the ideal therapeutic regimens, and now there has been much dispute regarding vitamin B12 deficiency associated with long-term use of metformin. We are yet not sure about the use of anti-obesity drugs, bariatric surgeries, the inositols and the anti-androgens, and their long-term use in PCOS patient. So now when we treat infertility, how do we go about inducing ovulation? All of us know we have the oral ovulogens, the clomiphene citrate, letrozole. Then we have gonadotrophins, laparoscopic ovarian drilling. However, many of us are doing drilling. And then the third line is IUI, IVF, ICSI, and in vitro maturation of oocyte. Clomiphene again is an anti-estrogen. All of us know it acts by binding to the nuclear estrogen receptors. We start with a dose of 50. The dose is increased every cycle, but most of us are not exceeding the dose of 50 to 100. And nowadays, most of us, we are supplementing clomiphene with gonadotropin. Now, clomiphene is typically given for 6 cycles. If no response, then we think of second-line therapy. We label the patient as CC resistant when extended use up to 7 days with starting dose of 100 does not give any result. But again, a word of caution for all of us using clomiphene. When used for more than 6 cycles, there is a risk of ovarian malignancy. Combined therapy, we combine clomiphene with metformin, we combine clomiphene with corticosteroids. Now we are combining clomiphene with metformin in CC-resistant cases and patient having a high BMI. We are combining clomiphene with steroids with patients with raised DHEAS level, and also we are giving OC pills as preliminary suppression in previous cycles if we come across with high LH and androgen levels in our patients. Letrozole now has been promoted as a first-line therapy for inducing ovulation in PCOS patients, and we know the mechanism is by blocking the aromatase and reducing the estrogen levels. We all know we start with 2.5, the current guidelines are 2.5, but the extensive marketing of 5 milligram is also done nowadays. But believe me, the standard protocol is using letrozole. Now this letrozole has no anti-estrogenic effect on endometrium and cervical mucus. It has minimal side effects and it has a better pregnancy rate. Now, there are certain controversies. As per recommendation, aromatase inhibitors like letrozole has been advised now as a first-line agent. Upon meta-analysis, letrozole was found to be better than clomiphene for ovulation, pregnancy, and live birth rate. Clomiphene citrate is now recommended as a second-line agent, and there is a compelling evidence of superiority of letrozole over CC with 40% increase in pregnancy rate and its shortest time to pregnancy. We must tell our patients that they should learn to trust the journey even when they don't understand it. Why? Because all of us know so many cycles of clomiphene and letrozole put us nowhere on the pedestal of achieving a significant pregnancy rate. And so the next comes the role of gonadotrophins. Laparoscopic ovarian drilling, I've made a mention, but most of us are not doing it left and right as it was done 2 decades ago. So now how to use these gonadotrophins is you give progesterone to induce a withdrawal bleed, do an ultrasound check for a cyst and the endometrial thickness, start gonadotrophin, usually recombinant is preferred. This is what is called as a chronic step-up low-dose protocol, 37.5 to 75 per day, depending upon the patient's weight and previous response to stimulation. Do a scan after 7 days, continue for another 7 days. If there is no response, increase the dose by 50% of the previous dose. Maximum you can go up to 225. If there is no response for 3 weeks, cancel the cycle. If there is response, continue the follicle till it is 18 millimeter to give a trigger. Your trigger is HCG and a recombinant 250. Luteal support is given with vaginal progesterone. Cancel the cycle if you have more than 3 follicles of 18 and a large number of intermediary follicles, and E2 if levels are exceeding 1500 in an IUI cycle. Now these controversies have risen regarding the use of gonadotrophins alone or with letrozole. Gonadotrophins, where available and affordable, should be used in preference to CC metformin in polycystic ovarian patients with an ovulatory cycle. The dose of gonadotrophin and protocol have been always a matter of debate. The chronic low-dose step-up or step-down protocol is the preferred one over the standard regimen. Just to make a passing mention of laparoscopic ovarian drilling, the rule of 4 punctures, 4-second current, 4 mm depth, cauterized with 40-volt current. Recent studies, however, show that unilateral drilling is better, but no improved results when compared to CC letrozole, and you end up with complications of adnexal adhesions and a decrease in ovarian reserve. Now the third line is ART. I'm not sure how many of us sitting in the hall are practicing ART, but just to tell you about ovulation induction with gonadotrophins also may not be successful in a subset of patients. So along with PCOS, there are certain comorbid features like male factor and tubal factor. IVF ICSI is indicated. For mild male factor, you can try IUI. The treatment regime is the long protocol. Now it is not preferred because of the increased risk of the ovarian hyperstimulation. You down-regulate the patient, you start your FSH stimulation. This can be a long GnRH protocol, it can be an ultra short, or it can be a short protocol. Antagonist protocol is the most preferred protocol in PCOS since the chances of ovarian hyperstimulation are reduced by 50% and you have the comfort of modifying your trigger. This is the protocol. You're starting your gonadotrophins, you're adding your antagonist, you're giving an agonist trigger, you're mostly cryopreserving the embryos and transferring them in the frozen, you are doing a frozen transfer cycle. Now with antagonist protocol, you are preferring an agonist trigger because you are reducing the, just a minute, risk of ovarian hyperstimulation and you are overcoming the short luteal phase by doing a frozen embryo transfer. In vitro maturation is not much in practice, but earlier it was recommended for polycystic ovarian syndrome patients. And to summarize, PCOS is a polygenic, multifactorial, heterogeneous disorder of still an uncertain etiology. The management of PCOS is dependent on whether the main concern is infertility, amenorrhea, or hirsutism. The first step in management of PCOS is weight reduction. Even minimum weight reduction is going to lead to regulation of menstrual cycle. Though clomiphene citrate was the first choice, but now letrozole has proven to be more efficacious. If clomiphene citrate fails and patient can opt for gonadotrophins, with gonadotrophins start with the lowest possible dose. For IVF, the preferred protocol is the antagonist with the agonist trigger. And a PCOS who has come to you with a high BMI, menstrual irregularity, hyperinsulinemic and hyperandrogenic state, with your confident management has become a mother, has reduced weight, is able to have a baby. So when you are putting your non-pharmacological and pharmacological efforts to a combined effort, you are able to have this win-win situation. And I thank you all for a patient hearing.